Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. He just wanted peace, trout, and silence, but instead, he inherited a war. When one man buys a forgotten Colorado lake, he doesn't expect to battle a suburban HOA queen, sabotage, lawsuits, and corruption. But some neighbors don't take private property for an answer. I never thought I'd end up owning a whole lake. Not a lakeside home, not some strip of muddy shore with weekend kayakers. An actual mapped, deeded body of water with legal control over the shoreline, the dam, and the water rights going back to the 19th damn century. But after 20 years of crawling through ductwork, climbing towers, and fixing disasters on oil rigs, bridges, and remote installations from Maine to Arizona, I was ready to settle. I didn't want a neighborhood. I wanted silence, trout, and the kind of place where I could hear my own damn blood pressure drop. And I found it. A half-forgotten alpine lake in central Colorado, nestled just west of a gated subdivision called Silver Pines. To them, it was a scenic background. To me, it was a deeded private sanctuary with borders older than their entire zip code. The lake came with more than just water. It had a weathered wooden dam from 1913, an old pump system for irrigation and fire suppression, a collapsed boathouse, and shoreline stretching just under 30 acres. The property line ran like a jagged ribbon just past the HOA's westernmost walking trail. And best of all, it was not part of any HOA. No board, no bylaws, no Karens peering over the fence with measuring tape and a clipboard. Just me, my deed, and whatever birds hadn't flown south yet. After closing, I spent my first week there hiking the boundary with a survey map, tagging trees, checking the dam, and rehabbing the little cabin that came with the lot. I installed motion cameras around the entry road and the spillway, cleaned the intake filter on the pump, and began drawing plans to reinforce the old floodgate with a steel crank system. I wasn't trying to lock the place down. I just wanted to be left the hell alone. But solitude doesn't sit well with people who think they're entitled to everything they can see. Within a few days, I started noticing footprints, lots of them, leading down from the Silver Pines trailhead and curling around the east side of the lake. Beer cans, fishing line, charred logs. Someone had even anchored a kayak against one of the stumps by the dam. My first instinct was that some kids had wandered too far past their welcome sign. But when I checked the footage from one of my cameras, it wasn't kids. It was families. Grown adults hauling coolers, unfolding chairs, staking out what they clearly assumed was their private lakeside retreat. Turns out, Silver Pines residents had been using this lake for decades as their unofficial country club. They just never asked whose water they were floating their inflatable flamingos in. I didn't raise hell. I printed tasteful signs. Private property. No trespassing. No lake access. I posted them every 100 feet around the perimeter and along the path where the HOA trail met my land. I uploaded time-stamped photos of the signs and geotagged them in my records just in case. I also flagged the county and updated my registration on the dam inspection list, one of those tedious engineer habits I never grew out of. The signs lasted less than a week. By Thursday, 3 of them had been pulled up or thrown in the lake. I replaced them. Friday, 2 were covered in spray paint. Community lake and you don't own nature. Saturday morning, there was a handwritten note on my truck windshield. Don't be that guy. The lake is for all of us. This will get ugly if you make it ugly. No signature, just smudged Sharpie and the faint smell of entitlement. I filed a report with the county sheriff. Nothing major, just a record. Vandalism, trespassing, harassment. I didn't expect anything to come of it, but I wasn't going to let it slide. I wasn't new to conflict. I just knew how to pick the ones worth fighting. Then came the envelope. Glossy, embossed. Sealed with the logo of Silver Pines Homeowners Association, it was addressed to the current occupant at my lake's parcel number, which told me all I needed to know. They didn't even have my name, but they had opinions. Inside was a formal letter from the HOA board signed by Karen Highstone, president, notifying me that I was in violation of established community norms for restricting historical access to communal natural resources. It went on to state that Silver Pines residents had used the lake for generations, that my behavior was disruptive and combative, and that if I didn't reconsider my position and open reasonable public access, they would pursue necessary remedies. I almost laughed. Reconsider my position? This wasn't a debate. This wasn't a handshake misunderstanding between neighbors. This was a threat from people who didn't own an ounce of what they thought they ruled over. I sat down, cracked open a beer, and wrote my reply. It was short. To the Silver Pines Homeowners Association, the lake, shoreline, dam, and adjacent structures are privately owned by me, Reed McCain, under Colorado deed, ES 9743A, and supported by registered water rights dating back to 1897. Your residents' use of the lake has been unauthorized for decades and is now formally prohibited. All further access will be considered trespassing and prosecuted as such. Do not contact me again. P.S. You might want to start building a new community clubhouse. The lake days are over. I printed 10 copies, certified, mailed them to the board, the county, and just for fun, the local news outlet that did real estate fluff pieces. I figured that would end it. I'd made my boundary crystal clear, but some people don't respect fences until they hit electrified ones. I wasn't expecting company that Sunday, let alone an unannounced visit from a suburban warlord and her sidekick attorney. I was halfway through reinforcing the intake mesh at the dam when I saw the white Lexus SUV roll up past my gate, ignoring the private property sign like it was a suggestion. Out stepped a woman in her mid-50s wearing what I can only describe as tactical yoga couture, navy slacks, an aggressively pastel blouse, and a visor that looked like it doubled as a weapon in the right light. That was Karen Highstone. I recognized her from the HOA letterhead. Beside her, in a beige power suit and carrying a leather briefcase like it was a sword, stood a woman with the kind of expression that said, "I don't have time for your nonsense, unless I'm billing for it." This, I would later learn, was Diana Main, HOA's legal counsel. They didn't bother with pleasantries. "Mr. McCain," Karen barked, marching toward the dam. "We need to talk. Immediately." "I charge a consultation fee," I said, standing up from the intake hatch, "but I'll waive it if you turn around and leave my property right now." Karen bristled. "I'm here as a representative of the Silver Pines community. You're currently in breach of multiple access precedents under the local civil code." "No," I interrupted. "I'm currently standing on my own land defending it from trespassers. Let's not confuse the two." Diana stepped in, her tone more measured. "Mr. McCain, our position is that your property has historically functioned as a shared recreational resource. We are proposing a formal easement agreement that would allow continued community access under regulated terms. And if I don't agree," Karen jumped in before Diana could answer, "then we will litigate. We'll drown you in paper. Every missed regulation, every environmental formality. You think you can just show up and slam the gate on 40 years of community tradition? You are not going to bully us out of our lake." I didn't even blink. "It's not your lake, and bullying only works when someone's scared. You should have done your homework, Karen. I'm not from around here, but I know exactly how to fight fire with documentation." Karen stepped forward, jabbing a manicured finger toward my dam. "That structure right there. If it collapses, you'll be liable for damages, for flooding, for property loss. Are you even licensed to maintain it? I rebuilt the spillway last month, filed it with the state engineer's office, and had it inspected 2 days ago. It's certified under my name as a Class B non-consumptive structure, privately held. Want the paperwork?" Karen opened her mouth, closed it, then turned to Diana, who didn't look thrilled. "We are not leaving without a resolution," Karen snapped. "You already have one," I said, gesturing to the new sign I'd planted next to the fence. "This is not a park. This is not public. This is not negotiable." Karen's face flushed a vivid red. "You can't just wall off nature." "I can when I legally own it. Walk along your own shoreline." "Oh, wait, you don't have one." She charged forward another step like she might physically snatch the deed from my hands. "We'll see you in court. You'll regret this." "Only if your court prints are better than your Sharpie threats," I replied. "Now get the hell off my property." They left in a storm of dust and indignation. I watched their SUV fishtail slightly as it peeled back toward the subdivision, one of my cameras quietly capturing every frame. That night, someone let the air out of both rear tires on my truck. I found the note tucked under the wiper blade. This one wasn't handwritten. It was typed, printed on HOA stationery. "Your aggression has consequences. Let this be your only warning." They were escalating. The next morning, I discovered that someone had jammed construction foam into the intake pipe of my dam's pump system. The entire lower line was clogged, the pump motor overheated, and partially seized. I had to shut down the water flow and spend half the day tearing apart the pipe with a crowbar and heat gun. That repair cost me close to $3,000 in parts and labor, not counting the time. It was also dangerous. If I hadn't caught it in time, the backflow could have compromised the whole damn structure. That was no longer just HOA stupidity. That was sabotage, tampering with registered waterworks infrastructure. I called the sheriff, filed a formal criminal complaint, and handed over the camera footage showing a figure in a hoodie skulking near the water line at 2 a.m. I couldn't prove it was Karen, yet. But I was building a case, and I wasn't done reinforcing. I ordered industrial-grade motion detectors, infrared trail cams, and had the main gate replaced with a remote-controlled steel barrier with a license plate reader. I also installed 2 solar-powered floodlights by the dam, triggered by movement. If they wanted to come for my lake again, they'd do it under a spotlight and in 4K. I could feel the war coming, and I had no intention of blinking first. By the time the lawsuit arrived, I had already expected it. People like Karen don't retreat. They regroup and find new paperwork. Still, the sheer thickness of the envelope caught me off guard. Certified mail, legal stamps. My name spelled correctly, Diana's influence clearly. Inside was a full packet, Silver Pines HOA et al. Versus Reed McCain. Their claim: the community had developed traditional access rights to the lake through decades of uninterrupted recreational usage, and I was inflicting irreparable emotional and social harm on the residents by enforcing private boundaries. I nearly choked laughing at that part. Emotional harm from losing unauthorized pool privileges. But humor aside, it was a serious move. They were asking the court to forcibly establish an easement across my land, permanent legal access to the shoreline, enforced by county authority. If they succeeded, I'd lose my entire purpose for buying this place. I needed a lawyer, and fast. Luckily, I had one in mind, Ethan Calloway, a property rights attorney I'd worked with on a waterline dispute in Nevada. I called him, explained the situation, emailed scans of the deed, the water rights, and the lawsuit. Ethan called back barely an hour later, and I could hear him grinning through the phone. "They're dead in the water," he said. No pun intended. Their whole case hinges on a concept that doesn't apply to fee simple absolute water holdings. Your title predates their development by, what, a century? A little more, I said. 1897. Beautiful. Judges drool over chronological superiority. We filed our official response within 72 hours. A counterclaim asserting trespassing, property damage, and attempted interference with water infrastructure. Ethan also requested a temporary restraining order against the HOA board, preventing any organized group access to the shoreline while the case was pending. The first hearing was scheduled quickly. The judge likely wanted to shut down whatever neighborhood circus was brewing. The courtroom was packed. Homeowners with lawn chairs and iced coffees like they were attending a matinee. Karen sat front row in something that screamed country club funeral attire, chin up, lips pursed, holding a thick binder labeled Lake Rights Evidence. Next to her, Diana, suit sharp, posture straight, face unreadable. My side of the room was quieter. Me, Ethan, and 3 binders full of historical documentation. When the judge entered, the room fell into the kind of silence that only fear of judicial annoyance can command. Karen's attorney, a younger guy named Brooks, fresh haircut, lots of gel, launched into his argument first. He spoke about tradition, community joy, property values, the spiritual connection residents had to the lake. Theatrics, nothing more. He suggested that by closing access, I was acting in bad faith and causing cultural displacement. The judge stared at him like he'd tried to sell essential oils in court. Then Ethan stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture. He simply placed our documents on the stand. The original land patent granted before Silver Pines existed, a chain of custody showing uninterrupted private ownership, the registered water rights under my name, the inspection records proving the dam was recognized as a privately managed structure by the state. He ended with one line. Your Honor, the plaintiff is asking the court to give legal authority over land they do not own, have never owned, and have only accessed through long-standing. Trespass. The judge looked at Brooks. Anything to dispute this? Brooks shuffled papers. Karen hissed at him. Diana stared straight ahead, her jaw tight. No, Your Honor. Half of their claims were dismissed on the spot. The judge scheduled a later date for the remainder, but heavily warned the HOA that their case was weak, and any further harassment of the defendant would be considered contempt-adjacent behavior. As we were packing up, I caught Diana watching me. She didn't look angry. She looked uneasy, conflicted, like she'd just found mold in a sandwich she'd already half-eaten. When court adjourned, she approached me in the hallway and quietly asked if we could talk outside of counsel. I nodded, curious. We met a few days later at a coffee shop in town. Diana didn't waste time. "They lied to me," she said. "The board withheld the title abstracts, the hydro registration, everything. They told me you didn't have proper water rights, that the dam wasn't registered. They said this was a simple access dispute and you were being unreasonable." She pushed her glasses up, eyes sharp. "I don't represent liars." I slid my phone across the table, showing her screenshots. Emails from HOA board members discussing getting rid of McCain and tampering with the pump to make him violate safety codes. Lines like eliminate his infrastructure and the county will condemn the lake. Diana read in silence. Her face went from surprise to disgust, then icy resolve. "That's criminal conspiracy," she finally said, "and fraudulent misuse of HOA authority." I nodded. "Welcome to my world." That was the moment the war took a turn. Not in yelling or vandalism, not even in court rulings, but in the quiet decision of a lawyer realizing she'd been fighting on the wrong side. The HOA thought they were tightening a noose around my neck. What they didn't know was that Diana had just picked up the knife and she was turning around to face them. When Diana called me 2 days later and asked if we could meet again, I had a feeling something serious was about to shift. We sat down at the same cafe as before, but this time she looked tired, like someone who had spent the last 48 hours digging through a landfill of lies and finally hit something rotten enough to gag her. She set a manila folder on the table between us, opened it, and began to speak without preamble. "I've formally withdrawn as counsel for Silver Pines HOA," she said, "effective immediately. And I've filed a declaration with the court stating that material facts were intentionally withheld from me. That includes the deed history, water rights registration, and, most importantly, internal communications about the plan to sabotage your dam." She flipped the folder around. Inside were printouts of board emails, financial ledgers, and something I hadn't seen yet, a proposal written by Karen labeled Restoration and Reclamation Initiative. It laid out a plan to regain de facto control of the lake, with a request for $75,000 in community action funds for landscaping and shoreline restoration. "They called it landscaping," Diana said flatly, "but it was itemized for contractor tools, night patrols, and legal contingency." She tapped the page with one polished finger. "They were preparing to destroy your infrastructure and bury you in lawsuits at the same time, all using HOA funds, without membership approval." I leaned back, exhaling through my teeth. "You're saying she weaponized the budget?" "I'm saying," Diana replied, "Karen has been embezzling and laundering money through HOA-approved shell vendors for years. I looked into their contractor payments. Half of them lead to a landscaping LLC registered to a man named Timothy Highstone, her nephew." I let that sink in. "You want to go after her." Diana nodded slowly. "I want to go after the whole rotten core of it, but I can't do it alone. I'm filing my own civil suit against the HOA for malpractice, reputational damage, and breach of ethical conduct. But with you, we can build something bigger." I didn't need to be sold. I agreed on the spot. That same day, Diana drafted a joint filing. I signed it in ink so dark it could have been blood. The new suit targeted the HOA board itself, Karen included, for deliberate harassment, conspiracy to sabotage registered infrastructure, financial misconduct, fraudulent misrepresentation, misuse of community funds for personal legal vendettas. We weren't just defending anymore. We were going on the offensive. The response came faster than I expected. The moment the joint filing hit the court registry, 3 board members resigned. One issued a public letter stating they had been pressured to approve budgets without full transparency and were misled about the nature of the legal dispute with Mr. McCain. Another claimed they'd never authorized any surveillance or physical actions against neighboring property, which told me exactly how far Karen had gone without their knowledge. It wasn't just a lawsuit anymore. It was a slow-motion implosion. Karen, of course, doubled down. She called an emergency HOA meeting. Only residents on her side were informed. They published a flyer around the neighborhood claiming I was attempting to privatize a sacred community space and that Diana had betrayed the people for money and power. I ended up with a dozen angry emails, and someone dropped a dead trout on my doorstep in a gift bag labeled "For the Man Who Killed Summer." Charming, but Diana and I didn't flinch. We kept building the case. She subpoenaed financial records, bank statements, and meeting minutes. I supplied footage, photos, and every scrap of HOA communication I'd collected. We met in my cabin by the lake every weekend, sorting documents under floodlights and coffee thermoses. One night, while cross-referencing bank transfers, Diana looked up and said, "You ever think about what comes after this?" When it's all over, I smiled. No more sabotage, no more angry fish-based threats. She smirked, then turned serious. "You know they'll come after you in the press. Karen's got connections with that city council candidate. She'll paint you as a reclusive nut job with a private moat." "Let them," I said. "They'll only make me more popular with people who hate HOAs." The next day, we received a court order granting preliminary financial inspection rights. That meant Diana and I could audit HOA spending over the last 5 years, line by line. The judge also ordered that no funds be dispersed from the HOA account without dual authorization, effectively freezing Karen's control. The first withdrawal we flagged was a $6,200 charge labeled Shoreline Reconstruction. The receipt led to a P.O. box linked to a landscaping contractor, registered at the same address as Karen's personal accountant. By week's end, we had over 15 suspicious transactions totaling nearly $300,000. We weren't just aiming for a legal win anymore. We were aiming for total structural collapse. And I had a feeling we were getting close to something big. Too big for Karen to keep hidden much longer. The crack became a fracture. The fracture became a landslide. Karen was spiraling. That much was obvious. With 3 board members gone, a court-ordered freeze on HOA funds, and our joint lawsuit moving like a wrecking ball through her carefully maintained illusion of control, she began to unravel in exactly the way you'd expect from someone who had gotten her way for too long, loud, messy, and reckless. It started with propaganda. Within days of the court's financial intervention, the entire Silver Pines subdivision was plastered with flyers, laminated, color-printed, likely from Karen's own home office. They read, "Save our lake. Stop the outsider. McCain is not your neighbor. He's a threat to community life. Water is a human right. Fight back." One included a cropped photo of me in my driveway, wrench in hand, taken from a distance like I was an armed fugitive instead of a man fixing a water valve. Residents started acting strange. Cars slowed near my gate, lingered. Someone left a water balloon full of black paint on my mailbox. Then a rock. Then a dead bird in a Ziploc bag. HOA paranoia had mutated into full-blown cult behavior. And yet, Karen wasn't satisfied with passive-aggressive tactics. She needed something theatrical, something illegal. I got the call from the guard I hired on weekends, Clay, a retired sheriff's deputy who worked security gigs for fishing lodges. It was 2 a.m. when he rang. "Reed," he said, low and calm. "We have a situation at the dam." I was out of bed and dressed in under a minute. When I pulled up to the spillway gate, Clay was standing with 2 local deputies and a flashlight trained on a figure in a wet hoodie, mud on their knees, wire cutters at their feet. It was Karen, caught red-handed, at night, attempting to tamper with the pump control box. Again, she had brought a crowbar, duct tape, and what looked like a makeshift siphon hose. Her SUV was parked just down the service road, engine still warm. When the officers pulled back her hood and confirmed her identity, she didn't even deny it. She started yelling about her sacred rights and how I was stealing a shared resource for profit, that I was environmentally criminal, and this wasn't over. She was handcuffed and taken in for questioning. I filed a second criminal complaint, this time for felony-level vandalism of registered infrastructure. Because the dam was a certified water control structure, tampering with it wasn't just trespassing anymore. It triggered state-level penalties under Colorado water law, and possibly federal charges if they linked it to interstate environmental regulation. Diana arrived at the sheriff's office while Karen was still in holding. She didn't speak to her, just handed over copies of the earlier court orders, our lawsuit, and the surveillance footage. She looked the sergeant in the eye and said, "If this doesn't become a full-blown investigation, I will bring it before the State Oversight Committee myself." 2 days later, the HOA residents received a notice that Karen Highstone was placed under formal investigation for misappropriation of funds and criminal conspiracy to commit property damage. The board was officially dissolved under an emergency vote, and a temporary audit team was appointed by court order to begin a forensic sweep of the HOA's finances. That's when it happened. The numbers started to bleed. Diana and I had already flagged shady landscaping expenses and fake vendor payments, but once the full audit began, the scope exploded. Over $600,000 unaccounted for, misdirected, or funneled through companies linked to Karen's relatives, ex-husband, and even a shell corporation based in Nevada. It wasn't just corruption. It was systemic looting, masked as community beautification, security patrol upgrades, and legal consulting services. Residents were livid. A few showed up at my gate just to apologize, ashamed of how they'd treated me. Some shared HOA newsletters I'd never seen, ones that claimed I was under criminal investigation, that I was squatting on contested land, and that county records were incomplete. Lies, crafted, published, and mailed on HOA stationery. Signed by Karen, Diana added libel and defamation to our lawsuit. And she didn't stop there. She began calling homeowners directly, people who had filed past complaints against the HOA. We built a coalition, elderly residents fined for mailbox colors, young couples threatened for unapproved fencing, a disabled vet who'd been hit with a monthly penalty for unkept grass while recovering from back surgery. By the end of the week, we had over 20 affidavits. Karen had turned Silver Pines into a prison of cosmetic tyranny, and now the prisoners were storming the warden's office. As for Karen, she posted bail, of course, strutted out of the station like she was emerging from a cab instead of custody, but her eyes were different now. Wild. She knew. She wasn't fighting to save a lake anymore. She was fighting to stay out of prison. And that fight was only getting started. There was a unique silence the morning after Karen's arrest. Not peace exactly, but a sort of vacuum, the kind that settles in just before the hammer drops. That hammer came fast. The state's Attorney General office, alerted by Diana's letters and the explosive findings from the HOA audit, formally opened a criminal investigation into the financial conduct of Silver Pines HOA. Subpoenas flew like confetti. Former board members were served on their front porches. One even tried to flee the county, didn't get far before a cruiser caught up with him outside a gas station near Pueblo. The forensic accountants found evidence of check kiting, forged invoices, backdated contracts, and at least 3 sets of books, one for residents, one for the IRS, and one, apparently, just for Karen. Every HOA fee paid over the past 6 years had been siphoned, misused, or outright laundered through a string of fake maintenance vendors, all of them connected by blood or divorce to Karen Highstone. Diana and I, meanwhile, were coordinating daily. We had a rhythm now. She'd handle the legal load. I'd handle the press and the residents. We became, unexpectedly, a team. There was no room for flirtation yet, but something had shifted. She started showing up to my property unannounced, not for strategy sessions, but just to sit on the dock with a coffee and breathe. Sometimes she didn't even talk, just listened to the water. Karen, however, wasn't done. That kind of narcissist never is. 2 weeks after her arrest, she held a press conference. Not on a podium or courthouse steps, but in front of a gazebo at Silver Pines Park, flanked by 2 desperate ex-board members and her new attorney. The speech was pure theater. She denied everything, claimed I had manipulated the audit, bribed the security company, hacked HOA emails, said I was an outsider with a vendetta, backed by fringe anti-HOA activists. Then came the part that made my blood pressure spike. She announced she was filing a countersuit, not just against me, but against Diana, the sheriff's office, the audit firm, and even the Colorado State Water Resources Division. Her claim: that I had fraudulently privatized a shared natural reservoir under false pretenses, and that my water rights documents were procured under administrative error. I nearly laughed until I realized she'd actually filed the motion. Diana wasn't laughing. "This is more dangerous than it looks," she told me. "If she convinces a judge to entertain the water claim, we'll have to drag every single chain of title since the 1800s into court. She's betting on complexity." We got to work. I pulled the original deed bundle from my fireproof cabinet, yellowed paper, signatures from long-dead ranchers, maps drawn in ink and ruler, but it wasn't enough. We needed expert validation. So Diana brought in Dr. Harold Kessler, a water rights historian from CU Boulder, who specialized in pre-statehood land claims and irrigation law. Kessler was a miracle. In 2 days, he found archived ledgers proving that my lake had been dammed and managed privately as far back as 1897, with consistent usage by only 2 family lines, none of which included anyone from Silver Pines. He even uncovered a lost municipal annexation map showing that when the nearby town incorporated in the 40s, the lake was explicitly excluded from community infrastructure zones. But just to seal it, I hired a licensed hydro engineer to inspect the dam and certify the restoration work I'd done. He confirmed private use, self-funded improvements, and no dependency on municipal lines. We submitted the report with notarized expert affidavits. Still, Karen managed one more trick. 2 nights before our next hearing, I woke to a faint humming sound outside my cabin. I thought maybe a generator. Instead, I found a drone hovering over the water, circling, scanning, recording. It darted off the moment I stepped out with a flashlight. I called Clay, who reviewed our security tapes. The drone had launched from inside Silver Pines. We traced the registration through the FAA. It belonged to a landscaping firm recently contracted by the HOA, one that didn't exist 6 months ago. Another shell. Karen was spying on my property again, this time with high-res aerial footage. Diana didn't hesitate. She filed a motion for protective injunction citing ongoing harassment, surveillance, and abuse of HOA resources. The judge granted it within 24 hours. Karen was now legally barred from coming within 200 yards of my property, and any further evidence of stalking would constitute a felony. The court date was set for 3 weeks later, and we were ready. But something about Karen's posture at that press conference, the cold calm, the confident deflection, told me she still had cards to play, and I'd be damned if I didn't find out what they were before she used them. The days leading up to the hearing felt like trench warfare, quiet, dry-mouthed, with every hour thick with tension. I kept to my routine as best I could. Sunrise coffee on the dock, drone patrol logs with Clay, and evening strategy sessions with Diana. But even with the protective order in place, I knew Karen wouldn't vanish without leaving something venomous behind. I was right. 2 nights before the trial, someone broke into the hydro engineer's office, not to steal hardware, but to tamper with his certification files. We found out when he called Diana, frantic, saying someone had tried to discredit the report he submitted to the court by emailing a revised version to the clerk, one that omitted key declarations about the dam being private infrastructure. We traced the email, fake domain, masked IP, a digital ghost, but the timing was too perfect to be coincidence. We filed an emergency clarification with the court and got the original submission reaffirmed. The judge issued a formal warning to the HOA's counsel, implying that if any further interference happened, she'd dismiss the entire countersuit with prejudice. That shook them, but not enough. On the morning of the trial, I walked into the Jefferson County Courthouse wearing boots, jeans, and the same belt knife my father wore every time he met with surveyors back in the day. It was symbolic, sure, but I wasn't just walking in as a defendant. I was walking in as the owner, not just of the land, but of the story. Karen wasn't there, but Diana whispered that she'd arrived earlier and was waiting in the hallway. When the doors opened, Karen entered flanked by 2 new attorneys, neither of them Diana's replacement from before. These were PR types, all smiles and power suits, the kind who say misunderstanding instead of fraud, and think lawsuits are just networking opportunities. They tried to delay the proceedings, claiming new evidence. The judge, having none of it, ordered them to proceed. Diana opened strong, outlining a clean timeline: purchase, registration, posted boundaries, escalating harassment, vandalism, surveillance, and then the frivolous countersuit. Her voice was like a scalpel, precise, sharp. When it came time for the water rights discussion, she let Kessler speak. His presentation was a masterclass in legal geology, photos, tax maps, ledger scans, and an original irrigation schedule from 1901. Karen's attorneys had nothing. They tried to argue communal historic use, citing resident testimonials, but the judge cut them off. Testimony without legal right is sentiment, she said. We're here to discuss law, not nostalgia. Then came the security footage. Diana played the drone incident, the dam tampering, even the footage of Karen walking the perimeter weeks earlier in violation of the injunction. The courtroom was dead silent. And then, a twist I hadn't expected. When the HOA's lawyers called their surprise witness, in walked Kevin Mallory, a former HOA treasurer I barely remembered, bald, nervous, wringing his hands. He sat, swore in, and then turned the whole thing upside down. He testified that Karen had ordered him to falsify HOA records to reflect non-existent shared usage agreements on the lake, backdated to a time before Silver Pines even existed. He said he'd kept copies, knowing it was illegal, but too scared to speak up until subpoenas started landing on his front lawn. Diana leaned toward me. He just sank them. The judge recessed for deliberation. When she returned, she dismissed the HOA's countersuit entirely and ruled in my favor on all claims: private ownership, water rights, damages to the dam, and civil harassment. Karen's protective injunction was upgraded to a permanent restraining order. The judge referred the forgery evidence for criminal investigation again. Outside, local news was already waiting. Microphones shoved toward me, cameras blinking. I didn't give a speech. I just pointed toward the lake behind us and said, "It's not about the water. It's about what people think they're entitled to and what they're not." Later that night, back at the cabin, Diana showed up with a bottle of wine and a printout. "What's that?" I asked. She grinned. "A list of residents already filing independent lawsuits against the HOA for misuse of funds." We toasted to that. The lake was quiet the morning after the verdict, unnaturally so, like it knew the war was over and was holding its breath to see what came next. The cabin, once surrounded by tension like a pressure cooker, now felt like a home again. No letters taped to the gate, no drone buzz overhead, no HOA board members taking a walk just close enough to make a point. Just wind, trees, and the distant creak of the dock settling into calm. I stood out on the shoreline with Diana. Her suit jacket was slung over a deck chair, bare feet in the sand, wine in one hand, coffee in the other. Not exactly standard issue legal decorum, but I wasn't one to follow court protocol outside the courtroom. "I've been offered a partnership," she said, sipping. "Not in a firm, in something else. A foundation to help landowners defend themselves from predatory HOA abuse. They want me to help write the litigation guidelines." I raised an eyebrow. "And what do you want?" She looked out over the water for a long time. "I think I want this. Quiet, something honest. Maybe a reason to learn how to kayak." We sat there for hours just letting it all settle. But behind the peace was movement, legal motion, paperwork, and the aftershocks of Karen's downfall. After the trial, the sheriff's department launched a full criminal inquiry into the HOA's finances. They found over $600,000 diverted into a landscaping company owned by Karen's cousin, a firm that had never performed a single service. An emergency HOA board meeting was called. Half the residents didn't show up. Of those who did, the majority voted to dissolve the HOA entirely, citing liability concerns, bad press, and a total loss of faith. The remaining funds were frozen pending restitution. Karen, now facing charges of fraud, destruction of infrastructure, contempt of court, and criminal conspiracy, was denied bail and placed under house arrest until trial. The biggest twist came 3 months later when the former HOA attorney, Diana's old colleague, filed his own lawsuit against Karen for professional sabotage and reputational damage. The case drew media attention, and by then, Karen had become something of a symbol in the HOA reform movement. Memes, editorials, a viral video of her meltdown in court played on a loop on local news. I didn't celebrate, not in the loud, vindictive sense. I just got to work. Over the next few months, I partnered with a local conservation agency to designate the lake and its surrounding acreage as a protected ecological preserve with limited recreational access by permit only. I hired a biologist to study fish populations, restored the wetland perimeter, and even installed solar-powered irrigation nodes to support the native plant life. At the entrance to the property, where once there had been a half-rotted HOA bulletin board nailed to a pine tree, I put up a carved wooden sign, "Private Property. Access by respect and invitation only." Underneath it, smaller script, "All others will meet the same fate as Karen." It was mostly a joke. Mostly. A year later, we hosted a small wedding on the dock. Just family, a few friends. Diana in a linen dress with her hair half up. We said our vows to the sound of frogs and wind, not legal arguments or angry knocks on the door. Instead of confetti, we let flower petals float on the lake. After the ceremony, one of the guests joked, "So, this is where HOA nightmares come to die." I just smiled. "No," I said, "this is where decency outlasts entitlement." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it.